The legend, local rapper known as Big Pokey, collapsed on stage during a June 18th performance in Beaumont.
There is an unspoken agreement between a performer and their audience. You show up, you give everything you have, and the crowd carries that energy back to you like a wave. It is one of the most beautifully human exchanges that exists, a room full of strangers united by music, laughter, sport, or spectacle. Most nights, the curtain falls, the lights go down, and everyone goes home with something warm tucked inside them, but sometimes, without warning, that agreement is shattered. What you are about to read are the stories of real people, artists, athletes, entertainers, broadcasters, who were taken from the world in the middle of the very thing they loved most. Some were on television. Some were streamed live to thousands of screens. Some collapsed on stages while the crowd still cheered, not yet understanding that what they were witnessing was not part of the show. These are not ghost stories or urban legends. They are human ones, and that is what makes them so much harder to forget. Dick Shawn was the kind of comedian who made audiences feel like anything could happen at any moment, and that was entirely the point. Born Richard Schulfand in 1923, he carved out a career in Hollywood and on stage built on beautiful, controlled chaos. He appeared in films, variety shows, and live performances, always with the energy of someone who had too many ideas and not nearly enough time to share them all. His style was unpredictable, physical, loud, and genuinely funny in a way that felt almost accidental even when it was completely intentional. On April 17, 1987, Shawn was performing at the University of California, San Diego. He was in the middle of a comedic monologue, riffing on politics and absurdity the way only he could. At one point, as part of what appeared to be a bit, he fell flat on the stage floor. The audience laughed. Of course they did. This was Dick Shawn. Falling down was exactly the kind of thing he would do for a laugh. So they waited for the punchline that it never came. After several minutes of silence, members of the audience began to realize that something had gone genuinely, terribly wrong. Shawn was not moving. He was not performing. Paramedics were called, but by the time help could reach him, it was too late. Dick Shawn had suffered a fatal heart attack, right there on the stage, and had died while his audience laughed. He was 63 years old. There is something deeply unsettling about that story. Not just the tragedy, but the laughter. The audience had done nothing wrong. They had responded to what they believed was performance. The comedian had trained them, in the best possible way, to expect the unexpected. And on that night, the unexpected was simply too real for anyone to recognize in time. Rock and roll does not age gracefully, it ages gloriously. And Sib Hashian, the drummer who powered the legendary American band Boston through their greatest era, was proof of that. Born in 1949, Hashian's drumming was the backbone of some of classic rock's most enduring tracks. His precision, his power, and his sense of rhythm helped shape a sound that millions of people grew up with and never let go of. In March of 2017, Hashian was performing aboard the Legends of Rock cruise, a floating concert series that brought together beloved rock musicians and their most devoted fans. At 67 years old, he was still behind the kit, still delivering the kind of performance that reminded everyone why they fell in love with this music in the first place. The atmosphere was celebratory. The ocean was calm. The music was everything it was supposed to be. Then, midway through a performance, Hashian collapsed at his drum kit. The crowd on board was stunned. Medical personnel on the ship responded quickly, but despite their efforts, Sib Hashian passed away. He had suffered a cardiac event that could not be reversed. The cruise, which had begun as a celebration, ended in grief. Musicians who had shared the stage with him over the decades remembered him as generous, humble, and fully committed every time he sat down to play. For the fans on that ship, his final performance was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder of what it looks like when someone gives everything they have to their art, right up until the very end. There are performers who are so deeply associated with a certain kind of joy that it becomes almost impossible to imagine them in any other context. Tommy Cooper was one of those people. The Welsh-born comedian and magician built a career on deliberate incompetence. His tricks were designed to go wrong, his timing was impeccable, and his towering frame beneath that iconic red fez made him one of the most recognizable figures in British entertainment history. He was not just funny. He was beloved. On the evening of April 15, 1984, Cooper appeared live on a televised variety program broadcast on ITV called Live from Her Majesty's. Millions of viewers across Britain were watching. He was deep into one of his routines, earning laughs as reliably as ever, when something shifted. Cooper staggered slightly, then leaned back against the velvet curtain behind him, and slowly slid to the floor. The audience laughed at it. Seemed so perfectly in character, the great comedian, the master of the pratfall, doing what he always did. The laughter continued even as the curtain was drawn closed and the stage was cleared. It was only in the following minutes, when the broadcast cut to other segments and backstage staff scrambled, that the truth began to emerge. Tommy Cooper had suffered a massive heart attack live on television in front of an audience of millions. He was pronounced dead before he could be transported to a hospital. He was 63 years old, Britain grieved. The image of his collapse, misread so completely in the moment, stayed with the public for decades. Cooper himself, in his wry and unknowing way, had spent his career making people laugh at exactly the kinds of moments that usually make people gasp. On that night, it cost him everything. Morphine was never a band that played it safe. Their sound, built on two-string slide bass, saxophone, and the deep, smoky baritone of frontman Mark Sandman, was unlike anything else in alternative music. Sandman had built something genuinely strange and genuinely beautiful, and audiences around the world responded to it with a devotion that felt almost personal, as if the music had been made specifically for them. On July 3, 1999, Morphine was performing at an outdoor rock festival in Palestrina, Italy. The evening was warm, the crowd was enthusiastic, and the band was well into their set when Sandman collapsed backward on the stage. It was not a dramatic fall. It was sudden and quiet in the way that the worst things sometimes are. The band stopped immediately. Crew members reached him within seconds, despite the rapid response of medical personnel at the event and the speed with which he was transported to a hospital. Mark Sandman was pronounced dead. He had suffered a heart attack. He was 46 years old. The music world felt the loss in a way that was hard to articulate. Sandman had been building something slow and irreplaceable, album by album, and there was a sense that Morphine had been just beginning to reach the audience they deserved. Fans who discovered the band after his death often expressed the same feeling, that they had arrived too late to something that mattered enormously. His music still circulates. His voice still finds new listeners. Some artists leave before they are finished, and the incompleteness of what remains becomes part of what makes it so compelling. In the world of professional wrestling, particularly in Japan, where the sport is treated with a seriousness and athleticism that commands deep respect, Mitsuhara Misawa was a giant. Not just in stature, but in influence. His career with All Japan Pro Wrestling and later Pro Wrestling Noah produced matches that are still studied and celebrated by fans of the craft. He was not just an entertainer. He was an athlete of the highest order, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that earned him reverence from competitors and audiences alike. On June 13, 2009, Misawa was competing in a tag team match in Hiroshima. The arena was full. The broadcast was live. What happened next unfolded in front of every person watching. During the match, Misawa received a rear suplex, a standard wrestling move, one he had taken hundreds of times across his career. This time, something was different. He did not rise. At first, fans in the arena assumed it was selling. Wrestlers absorb and perform pain as part of the storytelling of the sport. But the second stretched, and the stillness was wrong. Medical teams entered the ring quickly. Misawa was treated at the scene and rushed to a hospital, but he never regained consciousness. He had suffered a fatal injury to his cervical spinal cord. He was 46 years old. The shock that followed was not just grief. It was a reckoning, a moment in which the wrestling community was forced to confront the physical cost of a sport that pushes the human body to its absolute limits. Misawa had given his career to that sport, and in the end, the sport took everything back. Houston hip-hop has a distinct sound, a distinct culture, and a set of artists who helped forge its identity from the ground up. Big Pokey was one of those architects. As a longtime member of the Screwed Up Clique, the movement founded by the legendary DJ Screw, he was part of the foundation of what became known internationally as the chopped and screwed sound. His deep voice and grounded delivery made him a figure of genuine respect in the Houston rap community, and his loyalty to the culture he helped build earned him admiration that lasted across decades. On June 17, 2023, Big Pokey was performing at a live event in Beaumont, Texas. The crowd was there for a celebration, the music, the energy, the community. He was mid-performance when he collapsed on stage. Those close to the stage moved immediately. Emergency responders were called. He was transported to a hospital, where he later passed away. He had suffered a cardiac event, with underlying health conditions including hypertension and diabetes playing a role in what happened. That he was in his 40s, the outpouring from the Houston hip-hop community in the hours and days that followed was immediate and real. Artists who had known him for decades, fans who had grown up on his music, and younger artists who had been influenced by the world he helped create all mourned together. Big Pokey had never chased mainstream crossover success. He had stayed committed to his city and his people, and that kind of loyalty is not forgotten easily. There are acts that defy categorization, that exist in a space between performance and madness, between bravery and recklessness. The Flying Wallendas occupied that space for generations. Founded by Carl Wallenda in the early 20th century, the family troupe performed death-defying high-wire acts that drew audiences in the thousands. No nets. No harnesses in many performances. Just balance and nerve and decades of practice stretched across a wire above the ground. Carl Wallenda performed into his 70s. He had survived falls that would have ended other careers, and he returned to the wire every time with the same composure that had always defined him. On March 22, 1978, at 73 years of age, he attempted to walk a high wire suspended between two towers of the Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The walk was to be televised. Cameras were rolling. Crowds gathered below. Midway across the wire, the wind changed. Witnesses reported strong gusts that caught Carl off balance. He worked his balancing pole with the skill of a man who had spent his entire life in exactly this situation. For a moment, it seemed as though he might recover. Then he fell. The cameras captured it. The crowd witnessed it. Carl Wallenda did not survive the fall. He died from the injuries he sustained. He was 73 years old. He had once said that life is on the wire, and everything else is just waiting. He had spent his life proving that, and in the end, the wire was where he left it. Professional wrestling trades heavily in illusion. The moves are real, the athleticism, the physical demand, the endurance required, but the outcomes are predetermined, the narratives constructed, the risks supposedly managed. Fans understand this arrangement, and within it, they invest emotionally in the characters and the spectacle. Owen Hart was one of the most talented performers that world had ever produced. His athleticism was exceptional, his charisma undeniable, and his ability to make audiences love him, or love to hate him, was a genuine gift. On May 23, 1999, during a live WWF pay-per-view event called Over the Edge, Hart was scheduled to make a dramatic entrance as his character the Blue Blazer, descending from the rafters of the Kemper Arena in Kansas City by harness. It was the kind of theatrical moment that the wrestling world excelled at producing. The harness malfunctioned, Owen Hart fell from the rafters and landed in the wrestling ring. The broadcast cameras had been directed away from the arena ceiling during his descent, so television viewers did not see the fall itself, but thousands of fans inside the arena did. The event continued after a period of confusion, a decision that remains controversial to this day. Owen Hart was taken to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead. He was 34 years old. The fallout from that night extended far beyond grief. Questions about safety, about the decision to continue the event, about accountability, followed for years. His wife Martha Hart became a tireless advocate, pursuing legal action and fighting to ensure that her husband's death was not simply absorbed into the mythology of a business that had taken him from his family. Owen Hart's name carries weight, not just as a talent lost too soon, but as a reminder that real human beings exist behind every character and every performance. Jazz has always been music in conversation, with history, with the moment, with the people who made it. Lillian Hardin Armstrong was one of the composers and pianists who helped shape early jazz into the form that would eventually change American music forever. She worked alongside Louis Armstrong during a defining period of his career, contributing arrangements and encouragement that helped bring out his best work. She was, by any serious measure, a figure whose contributions to the music were significant and lasting. In August of 1971, a memorial concert was organized in Chicago to honor Louis Armstrong, who had died just weeks earlier. Lillian, now in her 70s, took her place at the piano to pay tribute to the man who had once been her husband and her most celebrated collaborator. It was an emotional evening, filled with music and memory. Mid-performance, Lillian slumped forward over the piano keys. Medical personnel at the venue responded immediately, but Lillian Hardin Armstrong passed away shortly afterward. She had suffered a heart attack at the age of 73. The timing, during a tribute to Louis, surrounded by the music they had built together, carried the kind of weight that resists simple interpretation. It was devastating and, in its way, deeply poetic. She had come to honor him and had ended her own journey in the same moment. Those who witnessed it never forgot it, and her name remains inseparable from the history of jazz she helped write. Brazilian music has always moved with an emotional intensity that connects across language and geography. Pedro Henrique was a guitarist and vocalist who embodied that tradition. His performances were physical, soulful expressions of a musical culture that runs deep in everything it touches. He had collaborated with several major artists in Brazil and had built a following that reflected genuine affection for what he brought to a stage. On March 12, 2023, Pedro Henrique was performing at a live music event in São Paulo. The show was energetic and the crowd was fully engaged. At some point during his set, he collapsed on stage. Initially, those watching were uncertain about what they had seen. But he did not get up. Emergency personnel responded at the scene and he was transported to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead. He had suffered a heart attack. He was 39 years old. The Brazilian music community mourned in public and in private. Pedro had been in the middle of what looked like a productive and promising stretch of his career. The images and videos from that night circulated widely, and for many who watched them, the disbelief was hard to shake. Here was a man in the middle of his life, doing the thing he was best at, and then simply gone. Megadeth's thrash metal catalog is one of the most technically demanding in the genre, and Nick Menza was the drummer who powered much of it. His work on albums from the late 80s and 90s defined the rhythm section of a band known for its precision and aggression. He was not just keeping time. He was contributing to compositions that required real musicianship, and the metal community knew it and respected him for it. On May 21, 2016, Menza was performing with his band OHM at a small venue in Los Angeles. He was 51 years old, still behind the kit, still playing with the energy and commitment that had defined his career. The venue was intimate. The crowd was close. It was exactly the kind of gig that musicians often say they love most. During the performance, Menza collapsed over his drum kit. The music stopped. People responded immediately, and emergency services were called. Nick Menza was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause was a heart attack. Tributes came quickly from across the metal community, from former Megadeth bandmates, from fans who had worn out his records, from younger drummers who had learned to play by studying his technique. He had not been with Megadeth for years at the time of his death, but that did not diminish the scale of what he had contributed. The records he made were still out there, still playing, still hitting the way they always had. The theater is a world unto itself, and the people who dedicate their lives to it often develop a relationship with performance that goes beyond profession. It becomes identity. It becomes the place where they are most fully themselves. Edith Webster was a veteran stage actress who had given decades to local and regional theater, building a modest but meaningful career in the world she loved. In 1986, Webster was performing in a production of The Drunkard at a venue in Maryland. Her role included a song, a sentimental, bittersweet number with the title, "Please Don't Talk About Me When I'm Gone." She had performed it before. It was a moment the audience anticipated and appreciated. On this particular evening, as she delivered the final notes of that song, she sank slowly to the stage floor. The audience assumed it was part of the performance, a bit of theatrical punctuation to cap the emotional moment. It was only when the cast and crew realized she was not responding that the tone of the room changed entirely. Emergency services were called. Webster was pronounced dead. She had suffered a cardiac event. She died on stage, mid-performance, in the act of doing the thing she had built her life around. The song she had been singing, with its instructions not to be spoken of after the singer is gone, became, in the aftermath, impossible to hear without thinking of her. She would have understood the irony. Anyone who gives their life to the stage usually does. South African music at the beginning of the 2020s was producing artists of real international reach, and Costa Titch was among the most exciting of them. His blending of amapiano rhythms with hip-hop energy reflected the vitality and creativity of a new generation of South African artists who were building something genuinely their own. He had a fan base that extended beyond his home country, and his performances were known for their high energy and physical commitment. In March of 2023, Costa Titch was performing at the Ultra South Africa Festival in Johannesburg, one of the country's most prominent electronic music events. His set was going well. The crowd was responding. He was moving across the stage with the kind of exuberance that defined his performances. Then he stumbled. He recovered briefly, enough that some in the crowd thought it was a momentary misstep, and then he collapsed and did not get up. Emergency crews came onto the stage quickly. Costa Titch was taken for medical assistance, but he did not survive. He was 28 years old. His death landed heavily on South African music and on the broader global audience that had been watching his trajectory with excitement. 28 years old is a number that the mind refuses to fully accept in the context of a life cut short. He had barely started. There is a particular cruelty in the idea that a hidden danger, invisible, unannounced, present only through catastrophic consequence, can exist on a stage where someone is pouring their heart out. Barbara Weldons was a French singer-songwriter whose music was gaining momentum across Europe at the time of her death. She performed barefoot as a matter of habit, a gesture toward authenticity and connection that her fans appreciated. On a July evening in 2017, Weldons took the stage at the Leo Ferré Festival in Gourdon, France. She was in the middle of her performance when she collapsed. The audience, experiencing her dramatic and emotionally charged stage presence for the first time, initially believed it might be part of the show. It was not that an investigation later determined that Weldons had come into contact with a faulty piece of electrical equipment on stage. She had received a lethal shock. By the time medical personnel could reach her, there was nothing to be done. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 35 years old. She had recently released her debut full-length album. The music was out in the world, finding its audience, building a life of its own, while its creator was gone before she could see it fully bloom. Her songs remain accessible to anyone willing to seek them out, and those who discover her work now do so knowing that she left only a small body of recordings behind. In some ways, that makes them more precious. Radio is a peculiar medium. There is intimacy in it, a voice speaking directly into the ear of someone who may be alone in their car, or cooking in their kitchen, or lying awake in the middle of the night. The broadcasters who do it well develop a kind of presence that feels genuinely personal, even when they are speaking to thousands of people simultaneously. Juan Jumalan, known on air as Johnny Walker, was one of those broadcasters that he hosted a program at 94.7 Gold Mega Calamba FM in the Philippines, and by 2023 he had also begun streaming his shows live on social media, extending his reach to an audience that could watch him as well as hear him. He was known for warmth and humor and the kind of easy conversational style that made radio feel like company. On November 5, 2023, Jumalan was live on both air and video when two men entered the building. One confronted staff. The other entered the broadcast booth where Jamalan was on air. What followed was a violent attack, broadcast to everyone who was watching and listening at that moment. Jamalan was struck down during the live broadcast. He was later pronounced dead. His death was senseless in the specific way that violence against people who have dedicated themselves to spreading goodwill is always senseless. Jamalan had not been a figure of controversy. He had been a figure of light, and that light was extinguished in front of the audience that had gathered to receive it.in heavy metal history. There are guitarists and then there is Dimebag Darrell. His playing with Pantera, the band he co-founded with his brother Vinnie Paul, helped define a strain of aggressive, technically brilliant metal that influenced an entire generation of musicians. After Pantera dissolved, he formed Damageplan and continued performing, still the same wild, generous, community-oriented figure that his fans had always known him to be. He was the kind of musician who would hang out after shows, take photos, sign anything put in front of him, and mean it. On December 8, 2004, Damageplan was performing at the Alrosa Villa in Columbus, Ohio. The venue was small and packed. The energy was the kind that only exists in that particular configuration of people and music in a small room. Then a man rushed the stage and shot Darrell multiple times. He was killed instantly. The date, December 8, was the same date on which John Lennon had been killed 24 years earlier. The parallel was noted by many in the days that followed, though it provided no comfort. Dimebag Darrell was 38 years old. The grief that swept through the metal community was profound and genuine. Dimebag had not been a distant celebrity. He had been a participant, in the scene, in the community, in the relationships that music creates between people. Losing him was not just losing a guitarist. It was losing someone who had made the music feel like it belonged to everyone, that he was not a television performer in the traditional sense. He was a man who happened to be filmed. The difference was everything. Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, brought to television screens around the world a kind of genuine, unperformed passion for wildlife that audiences found completely irresistible. He loved animals with the full weight of his personality, and that love was infectious. In September of 2006, Irwin was at the Great Barrier Reef, filming footage for a documentary project. While swimming near a large stingray, the animal reacted and struck him with its barbed tail. The barb penetrated his chest, reaching his heart. Footage of the incident was captured by the film crew, but has never been released publicly out of respect for Irwin and his family. He was taken to the boat immediately. Crew members attempted to stabilize him. He died before he could receive further medical help. He was 44 years old. His wife Terry and their children Bindi and Robert have continued the conservation work that Steve built his life around. The Australia Zoo remains active. Wildlife hospitals operate. Young people around the world still encounter Steve Irwin for the first time through recordings, and many of them describe the same thing, an immediate and overwhelming sense that this was someone who meant every word he ever said. Bollywood music has always occupied a vast emotional space in the lives of people across India and throughout the Indian diaspora. And within that space, certain voices become inseparable from certain memories: first love, graduation, long drives, loss. KK was one of those voices. His range and his warmth and his ability to inhabit a song emotionally made him one of the most beloved playback singers of his generation, with a catalog that touched nearly every register of human feeling. On May 31, 2022, KK performed at Nazrul Mancha, an auditorium in Kolkata. The hall was full. The evening was celebratory. He delivered song after song with the energy and commitment that his audiences expected and treasured. Those near the front of the stage noticed, as the evening went on, that he appeared to be in discomfort, perspiring heavily, looking strained between songs. He did not stop performing. After the concert ended, KK returned to his hotel. His condition deteriorated rapidly.